Again, we're looking at the problems that man has being born dead to God in the Spirit. The first thing we said was being self-centered. The next thing we said was insanity. That my mind, will, and emotions were created to be under His rule, and since they're not under His rule, we can't trust all of our thoughts, and we can't trust all of our emotions, and we can't trust our will. Now, the third problem that we want to look at is this. I don't know who I am anymore because I was created for God and I'm lost. I don't know who I am. Now, here's an interesting thing that we all do. In our self-centered, insane condition, we go to other self-centered, insane people and we ask them to describe to us who we are. Now, how much sense does that make? So I was using an example. I was in a mental institution visiting, and I went up to this fellow who I was there to counsel, and he's sitting on the floor, and I said, I'm Mike Wells, I'm your counselor. And he looks me straight in the face and says, you're not Mike Wells, you're a rabbit. Well, if I hop out the door, who's crazier, him or me? I'm crazier than he is. And yet, what we let other people do is tell us in their self-centered, insane condition who we are, and then we spend our lives trying to change it. And they can tell us who we are in two ways, an overt way or a covert way. Overtly, they can just tell us that they hate us. Covertly, they can just abandon us. Either way, I've got the message that something is wrong with me. And now as I look to other people, and this is the danger again of trying to milk my needs out of you, if you meet those needs, I may develop into a positive image, and I'll spend my life trying to maintain it. If you don't meet the needs, I've got a negative image, and I've got to spend my life trying to change it. But either way, I'm controlled by the behavior of others and an identity or an image that they've given me. Now, we can look at it this way and say, okay, in this circle, write down the desired impression that you would like to leave in a room full of people. What do you want people to think about you? So we're going to take a little break and we talk, we have lunch together. What would you like them to say in this group? Well, I'd like them to say that I'm spiritual, that I'm kind, that I'm loving, that I'm a success, that I'm a good mom, that I'm a good wife. All of those kind of things we'd like people to say about us. We have an impression that we want to leave with others, an image. And that's why image is so dangerous, because so much time is spent building my image. And we even use Jesus to build our image. And we see that all the time. It's going to build up my image. Now, here's a depressing thought. What you are at your worst moment is your true condition of your self-life. Because when things are at their worst, I need you at your best, and what I get out of you is the best I get or the worst. So when things are really at their worst, that's what I'm going to get. Hudson Taylor met a new missionary that came to the field in China, and the missionary was holding a cup of water, and Hudson Taylor took it out of his hand, and he hammered it down on the table. And the water went everywhere. And he looked at the missionary and he said, this cup represents your life as a missionary. You're going to have 100 blows, and I'm just watching to see what comes out of you. Do you know, I've used that illustration when I've done a wedding, and I'll just have a cup with me in the pulpit, and I'll hit it and let the water go and say, now, this is your marriage, and you're going to be hit by 1,000 blows, and we're going to see what comes out of you. Marriage isn't going to create problems. It's going to reveal the things that are in you. We hate to think that what we are at our worst moment is the true condition of our flesh. Now, one of the things about this ministry that I think is very unique is that we have built into this ministry failure. We're expecting failure. We know that you're not going to abide perfectly. And when you don't abide, you're going to shut off the life of Christ. Your humanity is going to start reigning, and you're going to express the deeds of the flesh. And that's not going to shock me. It's not going to disqualify you. It's not going to surprise me, because we have a self-life that needs to be denied daily. We are not teaching that if you get everything down, we'll never see you fail again, because there'll be situations where you close the door. We've built into that and said that we expect to see some failure in your life, that that's going to be there, that that's part of our growth, and there's things that we're going to learn there. But what I am at my worst moment is my true condition. You know, I finished up counseling one whole day, and I was upset about the counseling to begin with, because I came in from out of the country and Betty booked me a full schedule the next day. And it started out early and it went till about 6 o'clock. at the end of the day, it was an amazing time because 3 of the people there gave their lives to Christ. I mean, I came out of that office just lit watching God work that day. It was absolutely incredible. And one of the reasons it was incredible is when I got there, I was just so upset over the whole thing and wanted to rest. I just said, Jesus, if you don't show up, if you don't come, this thing's over. I mean, this cannot be done as a human today. Divinity has to come. You have to come. And it was a great day. I came out of there, I was just lit. And Betty looks at me and said, I thought you were mad about all the counseling. Well, anyway, we head home, and she's got to do grocery shopping. So I asked her to drop me off at Costco because that's my favorite store, Costco. And I love Costco because you get into Costco and you know you're getting the cheapest price anywhere. The most vexing thing for me is to buy something and find it cheaper a day later. I can't handle that. And I know at Costco I'm going to get it right. Well, I drop off because she goes, what are you going to do? I said, I'm not buying anything. I'm just looking around. She said, well, I'll be back to get you. Well, Costco closed at 6 then. 6 o'clock comes and there's no Betty. So I step outside to look for Betty. I don't have my wallet with me. I don't have anything. And no Betty, and the guy locks the door behind me. So I'm standing there waiting for Betty, and nobody shows up. It starts getting dark. We get the late afternoon showers we get in Denver. It starts getting a little colder, and then all of a sudden it turns to sleet, and the next thing it turns to snow, and there I'm standing with no coat like this in the snow with no Betty and no way to call. I can promise you this, none of it was sticking to the top of my head. There was plenty of heat coming out there. And I'm standing there for a good hour in this cold weather waiting for Betty and no Betty, and the parking lot's completely empty. So I finally went around. You know, when you travel around the third world long enough, you get resourceful. I went around behind the thing and I found a refrigerator box. There must have been a display model. So I drug my box out and I got out my little bitty Leatherman pocket knife and I cut a circle in that box and then put it over my head so I'd have some warmth, and I'm looking out this box waiting for Betty. So I'm looking for Betty. When's Betty coming? Finally, after another half hour, here comes Betty in the parking lot. Now, she drives like a typical thinker. She doesn't see anything over here or over here. It's just straight ahead moving. So I'm waving and got my hand out the box and waving like this. She doesn't see it. She's not slowing down. So I try to push out of the box, fell forward in the box, but I still don't want her to get away. So I crawl backwards out of the box through a mud puddle and stand up completely covered in mud and watch Betty go off driving away in the taillights. This is right after 3 people have come to the Lord, and there I am in the mud. So I put the box back over me, and confession's good for the soul. You might as well say what it's like. And I'm standing there in the box, and I'm thinking, you know, people ought to just come by here and throw a beer on me and put out some cigarettes, and then I'd have all the smell going. It'd be just right. I'm nothing more than a bloomin' wino in this box. That's how I'm living. I'm just a box man here, just a man in a box now. The woman's abandoned me. I'm living in a box. And the next thought I had was this. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and just mess my pants. I'm going to stand right here and mess my pants and just get the smell going. When she picks me up, she wants to treat me like a wino, I can smell like a wino. And I'm standing in that box going, And then finally, here she comes again. Well, this time I was out of the box like a rocket. I threw the box in front of the car. She hammered her brakes. And I flung the door open. And what did I say to her? Blessed woman. I'm so glad I married you. You're such a wonderful one. Thank you for having my children, taking care of me, booking those sessions where the people came to the Lord. I love your discernment. Is that what I said? We're still talking about what I said. She's still obsessing on what I said. I said things I wish I'd have never said. Now, I'm sorry, but when Christ is not flowing through me, that is Mike. That's me. And so how do you describe yourself at your very worst moment? One fellow was speaking and he had an orange and he asked all of us what's in it. We said orange juice. And he squeezed it and out came all this black goo. He'd injected it with ink. And he said, see, you don't know what's in anything until you squeeze it. What's in you when you're squeezed? And when you're squeezed and this stuff comes out of you, what do you want to talk about? The injustice of the person squeezing you? Or do you want to talk about what God wants to talk about, which is what came out of you? See, I'd rather talk about the injustice and go find a counselor that'll listen to the injustice of what's been done than I would of what's come out of me. And so what we are at our worst moment is often we're angry, we're control freaks, we're carnal, we feel like a failure, we feel worthless, and we feel unlovable. Who wants to marry this kind of a person? Who wants to be around that kind of person? Who wants to hire that kind of person? Nobody does. And so what we do is we run to our emotional sewing machine, we stitch up a success suit, we zip it all the way here so people can't see any of this stuff. And we go out into the world a fake. Now I use this example. If I can convince you you're a rabbit, how long could you hop? Well, you might hop to the door and you might make it to the pool and you might make it to the parking lot, but eventually you got to stand up because you're not a rabbit, you're a human being, and it just hurts too bad. When we're playing this game and we put on our success suit and we start hopping like a rabbit, how long can we hop? Well, what we do, and it's an amazing thing that the world gets the cream and the family gets the crud. Because what we do is we leave the house and we hop all day long like this. And when we get home at night, what are we ready to do? Stand up. And so the people around us that really ought to get this, the world is getting, and strangers are getting, and the whole family is getting this. Now, as I've said, I believe in PMS. I know that's physiological, that there's something that goes on with women in that. I know that they have a difficult time. And so there's no question about that. My question is always this, though. Why is it that they can go to the grocery store and see someone they know and be polite, talk to the lady who checks them out and be polite, drop by the school and see the teachers and be polite, and then come home and take their husband's head off with a knife? Why is that? Well, it's because we'll put the extra effort into someone else to hop like that, but I'm not going to put it in to the people around me. And we all do that. Now, when we live like that, we're always going to be controlled by others. And they'll control us on the negative by just hinting that this is true about me. And I'll react and respond and go into self-protection. They'll also control me by believing the best in me. In fact, which of these two do you think is worse to be controlled by? Yeah, this one over here is by far worse because this is an image that I'm trying to maintain. And it's very, very difficult to maintain an image. One of the worst things that you can do to a thinker is praise them for what they've done at this high standard because now they can't go below that. So one of my sons, and I said I had one son who couldn't read, and I had another son who never had to read, never did anything, and got straight A's and tested out, in the top 1% of the U.S. and all those kind of things. And when he went to university, one of the things I said to him when I dropped him off is, we're really happy you're here. We really want to support you. We want to do what we can. But I want to tell you that I do not want you to come home with above a 3.0, a B average. And he just looked at me kind of funny, and I said, no, I don't want you coming home with anything above B's. You're coming home with B's, you don't have anything above a B, you don't have my support. I want B's, nothing above a B. Because here's the thing, when you're a perfectionist, and this amazes me when I'm doing discipleship with people, and I'll ask them to tell me their greatest hurt, and a perfectionist will tell me this, I got an A- once. They remember that A-, because the standard is set so high now that anything below perfection is failure. So it wouldn't matter if they were a D student. And I didn't want him to live under that kind of pressure that that's what he had to be, because for Dad's image, or for his image, or anyone else's image. Anyway, statistically we know this, that 95% of straight A students grow up and work for a C or a D student. Because the school system, of course, just judges what a thinker can do. But to try to maintain this is a terrible, terrible thing. And of course, that's why you'll see people who in their spirituality are maintaining this, and then they go home at night and they're completely exhausted from trying to maintain that in front of other people. Now, how do we get this image that we're trying to protect and maintain? In my self-centered, insane condition, I went to other self-centered, insane people, and I asked them to tell me who I was. I got identity messages from their behavior. So one of the first places you'll look to find your identity and who you are is Dad. He's the head of the house. Now, what if you had a dad who was passive? And there's a lot of ways to have a passive dad. He can be passive because he's an alcoholic. He can be passive because he's dead. He can be passive because he travels all the time. He can just be the potted plant that just sits in the corner. He's just passive. Now, if you have a passive dad who never spends any time with you, never talks to you, and is not there for you, what kind of an image will you have? What would the enemy, whose job is to kill, steal, and destroy, whisper to you? Maybe I'm worthless. Maybe I'm unlovable. Maybe I'm unwanted. What if you had, and it's happening more and more today, a dad that's abandoned you? What's the enemy going to whisper about that to you? What if your family has a divorce? Every kid likes security. What's that going to do to you? You think it's going to make you feel a little bit maybe insecure? Here's a thing that if you're a thinker kid you don't like, what if you had to be moved all the time? A thinker has an average of 1 to 3 close friends their whole life, and you happen to have a military dad and you've never gotten close to anybody. You just had to move and move and move. What if people call you names? You think about the things that kids say to other kids. There's a lot of ways to abuse a person. They often manifest the same symptoms. But you can abuse a person physically, verbally, sexually, emotionally. How's that going to make you feel? And then here's another thing that'll give you a real message. What if you have a parent that completely overprotects you? And every decision that you make, they question. Everything that you do, they redo. Do you know eventually that's telling you that you're a bit stupid, aren't you? And you'll be fearful about making decisions yourself. You can be in a family where there's comparisons. And whenever you hear your parents talking, they're talking about the smart kid, the successful kid, the one that made it, the one that's a doctor. What if you have any kind of physical deformity? And people make fun of you, or you don't get the job, those kind of things. What we're looking at are the things that take place around us that begin to develop our identity at the worst. And we try to cover that thing up, and we're always controlled by it. And now I myself becomes the focus of my life. Now, that allows me then to be controlled by everyone around me. Another big message that we get is the one concerning acceptance. And it kind of looks like this. Here's rejection and here's acceptance. And I want to go from rejection to acceptance. And so what my parents tell me is if I keep rule number 1 and keep my room clean, they're going to accept me. They'll love and accept me. So I keep rule number 1, and do I get love and acceptance? No, I get rule number 2. I also want to pick your friends. Well, I'll let you pick my friends because I want love and acceptance. So I get up here and I don't get love and acceptance. I get lied to again, and I get another rule. And at that point, what I'm ready to do is to explode, and I jump off of the mountain and I say, I'd rather live in rejection than to play your game any longer, because there's no way I'm ever going to get acceptance. What you're going to do is you're going to continue to do this to me until finally I'm just giving up. Not only do we do that to our children, but we do that to our mates. And there's always one more thing and one more rule and one more little thing they could do that would make me happy, and I never do give them acceptance. And they never arrive. Do you know, it surprised me how many times in my office I've had a man turn to his wife and say, I'm leaving you. And the biggest shock to this man is that she cares. because they've been married for 25 years and all he's heard is what's wrong. He hasn't heard anything that's right. And he's actually shocked. And I've had men look at their wives and say, I thought you would be relieved. This is the message I got. I'm unacceptable to you. I have given you my best, and my best has never been good enough. Now, it's just not just men that do that with women. Women do it with men too. But have you ever felt that? You ever had the enemy whisper that to you? If you want more out of me, there's nothing else to give. I've given everything there is. This is what I am. And I'm not going to get the acceptance, so I'm just going to jump off of this thing and go ahead and live in the rejection and get on, and hopefully you can be happy now. When we live this way and we grow up this way, it affects the way we see God. And so I can divide you in two, and on one half I put what I do, and on the other half I put who I am. And down here are all the relationships that you have. In your life and in your experience, how do people accept you? Is it on the basis of what you do or who you are? Well, it's been on the basis of what I do. I can prove it to you right now in this room. All you've got to do is clear your throat, turn to the person next to you, and spit on their face. And how many people in this room will go, God bless you, I'm so happy I'm sitting by you? You won't do that. And so what we've been told is, if you do this right as a positive, and this is a positive, and this is a positive, I'm going to love and accept you. But what we found is that one negative cancels the whole thing, doesn't it? So now one day someone wants to talk to me about Jesus and the love of God. And I'm hearing one thing, but I'm feeling another thing, because all relationships are based on what I do. And here's the message that we give people. Again, you can't do it. You can't get yourself into heaven. You're going to go to hell. Come forward. Let Jesus do it all. And as soon as you come forward, here's a list of things that you have to do that God wants you to do. We've immediately just canceled everything that we just said about the acceptance of God is based in Christ. It's not in Christ. It's in what you do. Now, people then will buy into those lists, and there's wonderful lists out there of what you need to do. And they'll head out doing the positives in the power of their flesh and their strength and their self, and they'll move up here, and as soon as they have a negative or a failure in their life, they won't even wait to see what God does. They immediately just run. Because the rejection of people is so painful, what would the rejection of God be like? I don't even want to stand around and hear it. And so we'll immediately run from God. These messages that we get in our insane, self-centered condition begin to develop my identity and my image. And I spend my days consumed by covering it up and protecting it. And when it's revealed, I come undone. Now, how that works out then, we'll go to our next diagram, is in problems. An event takes place, it triggers my worst identity, and I have to find some way to cope with those feelings that I have. And so when you go into counseling, there's a lot of different approaches, and one approach will be that the problem is the problem. And so we're going to spend our whole life with our focus on the problem. We're going to analyze it from every angle. But of course we know that doesn't work. So the next approach is there was an event that created the problem, and maybe you need to look at that. So the fellow's got a problem with alcohol. And he goes to the counselor and he says, why are you drinking? And he said, well, my wife said to me the other day she wished she'd never married me. And the counselor says, what you need to do is find a wife that's nicer, that never says those negative things to you. Well, of course, there's women everywhere who'll never say a negative thing, aren't there? Well, there isn't. So the solution's going to be to switch wives. Now, for me to have a problem, I have to rebel against God. And I want to justify my rebellion against God, and the only thing that'll justify rebellion is anger. So I have to get angry at someone or something to justify my rebellion. If you'll think whenever you're in the flesh and participating in the deeds of the flesh, you're always an angry person. But you don't want to take the blame for it, so what we do is we find someone else to be angry with to justify our rebellion. So you have the fellow who wants to have an affair and he can't justify it. What he does is he goes home and he picks a fight with his wife until there's a big explosion and he feels good driving over there. When the pressure's building and we've decided to move into self and into the deeds of the flesh, we will always have some kind of internal anger to justify our rebellion. We're mad doing it and we feel good about it. So what some counselors would say to you is, the event's causing the problem and you need to sort that out. But really what we started out talking about was root rot, and the root is my self-life, and it's unique in you, that's been developed through identity messages I received as I looked to other people in my self-centered, insane condition to get my spiritual needs met that only God meets in me. So we could go back to this circle of my worst identity, and this fellow brought into the marriage feelings of worthlessness. Now, when his wife then is upset and she's moved into the flesh and she's moved into self and says, I wished I hadn't have married you, she just confirmed the feelings that he's been working his whole life to cover up. And actually what she's done is undressed him and zipped down his success suit. So here's the example that I use. If right now soldiers came in this room, they lined the walls, they pointed their guns at us, and they told all of us, stand up and take off your clothes, and you have to go home naked. It'd be interesting to see the response of the people in the room. Some people would just say, shoot me. I'm not taking off my clothes. Then you've got the odd people who say, I always wanted to be in a nudist colony. This sounds like fun. I mean, they want to take their clothes off. You might have that person. Then you got the people that get drunk and it doesn't matter if you have any clothes. You get the people who get high on drugs, it doesn't matter if you have them. Then you have the rageaholics. And if you look at them naked, they'll start screaming at you until you get away from them. Then you got the thinkers in the room that are figuring out, okay, I'll take my clothes off, but I'm going to go out there and I'll get behind the chair, and then I'll get behind the bush, then I'm going to wait till dark and I'm going to walk home. Or you have the approach that I would take, which is one of depression. I would just head out the road with no clothes on, just walking in depression, saying, well, I never deserved any clothes anyway. I'm surprised I had them as long as I did. And you'd see me and I'd say, yeah, and I don't have no clothes either. Don't deserve them. And I'd go that way. Well, what happens then is when an event takes place and my whole life is self-centered, I'm consumed with me, with changing my image or maintaining it, and this event rips away my success suit, I'm left standing there naked, and I've got to deal with this. Maybe I really am worthless, unacceptable, a failure. No one would want me. And now I'm angry. I go into rebellion, and the source of my problem now is that the reason I have the problem is I've got to find some way to cope with my nakedness. But what if we could kill this and give you a life that had worth? If that could happen, then the event wouldn't bother me. I wouldn't have to go into rebellion. I wouldn't have to get angry, and I wouldn't have to have the problem. And I could go to the very root of it. And Christ came to go to the very root of the issue. Do you know the solution to this whole dynamic, and we'll end here? Get a life. I mean, just get a life. And get a life that wins and a life that works.